Okay, welcome to the Lowdown with Tony Lowe. I forget what episode this is, but it's June 4th, right?
Yes.
The year is 2020. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Things are on fire. There's political unrest, much distress, and much love for this guy. So this is Shereef, and before I say anything else, I want to say that Shereef, I really honestly consider you an ally to humanity and an ally to me personally, and an ally to all, despite the fact we're about to have a conversation in which I'm going to be somewhat critical of your work. And, you know, to me, this is a question of how to help. It's not a question of, we're not about to talk about something that ever questions what the end goal is here, which is Shereef wrote an article, and it was in Medium. I don't know if Medium is like a magazine or a place where people post things, but you
like Twitter for long form.
It's what?
It's like Twitter, but for long form, if you want to write long form. So it's just like Tumblr or really like Facebook. It's just you can post anything. It's not a publication. It doesn't have an editorial board.
Okay.
Yeah.
In it, you said that you painted a picture of what you called the ideology, right?
Yeah.
And it was kind of a combination of a bunch of things. That it was about the relationship of Black and brown people to the concept and the constructs and the structures of racism, the way I read it. And then
really of a lot of people, not just Black and brown people. I think a lot of white people have that ideology that I was talking about.
Yeah. Okay. For real.
Yeah.
And then also at the end, you wrote a message to folks who might be marginalized in this structural racist system, and what you wanted them to know about the piece if they felt like it was upsetting to them. And then you wrote a section to white people, of which I identify. And so I responded to you what I thought of that part. And then that led to this conversation. What was your intention? Because to me, it seemed like you wanted to downplay the severity of, quote, racism in general. That's how it felt to me. What was your intention, and what was your intention in putting it up and taking it down?
My intention was to be in integrity with myself. Like I've come to the conclusion, but I have this idea that helping others is actually a really difficult thing, and it's really it's a tricky thing to do something with the intention of helping unless somebody has explicitly asked for help. And so I wasn't trying to help anyone with this article. I was trying to be in integrity with myself. There's like, I was trying to put words to something that's been bugging me for years and that I've been seeing growing, of this kind of way, like these set of ideas that I see as toxic and I see as harmful and I see as really well-intentioned. And I was trying to say, hey, I really don't like these ideas. I don't think they're accurate. I don't think they're useful. And I'm sorry for every time that I've either perpetuated them or seen them fly by and not say anything. And I'm sorry for the impact that I imagine it's had on my friends.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I watched you, there's also a video on YouTube where you address it.
Yeah.
With William.
Yeah.
What is William's last name?
Winters, William Winters.
William Winters. So you and William Winters discuss it, and I did end up watching that. it seemed that as though, despite William taking some issue with the central messaging in your writing, it seemed like for the most part you differed on some semantic things and some how to proceed items versus having differences in the existence of structural, racist, oppressive elements of society.
I mean, I think there's a lot that William and I agree on. One thing, just to be clear, we agree on after the talk is that the article is poorly written and created more harm than good.
Okay.
So I agree with him on that. And actually, talking to him helped me see that. But I think actually, William and I disagree on a lot of things. What I saw was that I had been sort of turned off by a caricature of what I call the ideology, and that there's something much deeper than that caricature that is real and true, that someone like William will take as real and true, and that's sort of by creating a straw man argument or just kind of belittling the fundamental ethos underneath those ideas. I was doing the same thing that I don't like it when other people do. I was playing into the us versus them kind of sensationalizing thing that I see the distortion of anti-racism do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, but I still think that the anti-racist view is based on an ethical premise that I fundamentally disagree with, and I think I think it can lead to more harm than good.
And what is that premise that you disagree with, would you say? And I don't mean, I apologize if I sound like I'm interrogating you, but I do want.
No, I really appreciate the question. So I'm just starting to clarify these thoughts. You're getting this fresh off the press here.
Yeah,
so it's helpful to ask. So basically, I would say there's there's two views, right? Well, let's say there's four general views when it comes to racism, right? One is, let's call that the overtly racist view, and this is I'm a KKK member, and I do think that genetically white people are better than black people and brown people, and it should continue to be the case. Like, this is a sort of superior race ideology, overtly racist ideology, right? Let's call that what it is, which is just overtly racist.
Can I interrupt right there, though?
Yeah, sure.
To me, if we want to talk about what is the fundamental of the word racism and how it plays out, I think that there is, if we're talking racist ideology, I think it's a more complete thing to say, whether you're in the KKK or whether you are President Barack Obama, the extent to which we operate on judgments that are the result of a set of assumptions about a subset of the human group. In other words, if I think there are qualities inherent in you that have to do with your so-called race, that's racism. Now, I may never act upon that. And I think you're calling overt racism, you're talking about race-based violence.
Or just having the ideology, just sitting at home saying, all these black and brown people need to leave my country, just in thought. Even if you're not acting on it, I would still call that overt racism. You're consciously aware that you think one race is better than the other.
Okay.
Right, so let's.
Now I understand. When you say the Klan, I have I associate that with a set of actions more than a set of beliefs. But now
it could be the Klan, or it could be your uncle's, your aunt's new boyfriend who still thinks that all the black and brown people should leave, right? He doesn't do anything about it, but he's still thinking that, right? That's still, I would call that overt racism.
Or when I was 11 and everyone told me that black people had an extra calf muscle and that's why they were better at sports than me.
Right. That would be like the genetic, there's something DNA level different or genetically different based on people's melanin level in their skin.
Right. Which happens to be a very bizarre and incorrect belief, just in case anyone was wondering.
Just in case anyone's wondering. that's just, unless you want to throw away science and logic and civilization. Yeah, sure. That's just,
it's just quite a popular practice. So, but go ahead. Yeah.
So let's call that, viewpoint one. And let's both you and I agree that neither of us hold that view at all in any stretch of the imagination. consciously.
We don't consciously hold those views.
Right. Great. So that would be number one. View number two is something like, let's call that sort of the right-wing view or the alt-right view. And that's the view of like, well, look, racism is a thing of the past. We got over it. We have the civil rights movement. Now everybody is equal in the eyes of the law. So racism no longer exists. We're living in a meritocratic system, and anybody who's not doing well is because they haven't worked hard enough and haven't taken enough self-responsibility. And anybody who's doing well is because they're working really hard and have taken a lot of self-responsibility. Everybody who's out there complaining about race is a snowflake, and they're just race baiting, and they're just like, they're imagining it. They're just imagining it. It's no longer existing. America is great. We're no longer a racist country. Racism is over. Yes, we had a bad history, but we fixed it.
Okay. But certainly that, yes, and I will add to that. Actually, I want to subtract from that the right and left. You added a political divide, where the post-racial narrative has been in full play on both the Democratic and Republican sides of the United States government, and certainly the right and the left. And,
thank you. You're absolutely right. That's much more helpful to put it that way. I agree with you.
And to put a finer point on it, you're talking about an ideology that was, mostly formulated in the early 1900s by a person named Lewis. This idea of, that largely the problems of black and brown people were a lack of skills on their part. And this was echoed even in the integration, at the Johnson's speech when, they were enforcing Brown v. Board. Even already they were talking about the culture of poverty and the black family. And this has been perpetuated even by President Obama in his speech, where he talked about, there comes a time where black folks just gotta pull themselves up from their bootstraps. It's something that's so deep in our culture that all of us, to some degree or another, take comfort in believing it.
Yes. So let's call that viewpoint number two, the post-racial view.
Okay.
Right. These are obviously generalized buckets. I'm sure people can pick and choose from some of these buckets, but that's a general bucket, right?
It is the same human habit that gives rise to racism, is that we can't compute things unless we put them in buckets. And so we do. Yeah. Which isn't a criticism of the practice. It's just a simple, we're being conscious and we're organizing things so that we can make sense of it.
Yeah. And then I would say then there's another view, what I'm now learning is that there's two views. And both of them have this in common. Both of them are not sold on the post-racial narrative. Both of them think that there's still today a problem, and that even though a lot of our laws have changed, and even though there is some progress made, that our racist past continues to be present today in some very overt and some very subtle ways, that we, like, the impact is ongoing and continuing, that the past has not been repaired or redressed, and that structurally and institutionally racism still exists.
Okay.
So let's call that view 3 and 4. And that's really where my article came, is because I wanted to say, hey, there's a way to, I don't agree with how, let me back up. Let's call that view 3 and 4, okay? And then let's take sort of the mainstream anti-racist view right now, which agrees with all these things that I just told you, which I also agree with. And it says, it's making a case for redressing the past. Its sense of justice basically lies on the ethos of justice is like, we cannot look at today without understanding the impact of the past, and we cannot address justice without somehow redressing the past and making up for it. This is the case for reparations. This is Ta-Nehisi Coates, Michelle Alexander. It basically looks at the past as it gives race a meaning through its past, right? View number one gives race a meaning by saying the DNA is superior. View number two basically says race is no longer no longer has meaning in America. We're post-racial. And view number three says, no, race still means something because of our past, because of our unredressed past, because of our unrepaired past. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And this is where I was trying to say, hey, look, I don't agree with this ethical stance. And I did a really poor job of doing it.
Sorry, was that an ethical stance? What is the ethical stance there?
The ethical stance is that the injuries of the past need to be somehow countered or redressed.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. That's what justice is. Justice is your father did something to my father, so now you owe me something.
I understand that.
Yeah, and that's an ethical kind of position about what justice is. It's an idea around group justice, group injury, and group justice.
It is, as you say, the case for reparations.
It's the case for reparations, right? And because of that belief that this is what justice means, that if one group has been injured by another group, and so the children of the group that was injured are owed something by the children of the group that did the injury.
Yes, okay, I understand.
Then any post-racial narrative not only dismisses structural racism that still exists today, that you and I agree still exists today, but it also minimizes and dismisses our case for the justice that we believe is needed.
Okay, so I hear you saying that there is a distinct difference between acknowledging that there is a structure of, carefully maintained structure of inequity, a structure of race-based inequity, right? Race-based mechanisms that create inequity, right?
Yeah.
And that system is still alive. However, you are saying that we should be focused on dismantling that current system without reparations, without feeling the need to undo or repair or repay something from the past, and yet we still have to dismantle the structures if we are.
I'm saying we're both in agreement that we have to dismantle the structures. I'm saying a lot more than that. I'm saying the very idea of group justice will eventually run into the idea of individual justice. Like, these are incompatible ideas.
Okay.
And we have to choose one. And if we're not choosing one, then we're straddling kind of a moral ambiguity that eventually situations will say we have to choose one. And that the continuation of the ethos of group justice goes against the ethos of individual justice. And I don't know which one is right. I'm just saying, I think that there's less harm and more chance for actual peace and thriving if we go with the idea of individual justice. Dismantle any structural racism, you and I both agree, but the idea that, identifying as groups, looking at groups and saying, you are the son of my father's injurer, and therefore you are an injurer, or therefore you owe me something, perpetuates an us versus them way of thinking and moving in the world that is, to me, endless. It's basically saying the pendulum was this way, and therefore it is okay for it to swing this way. And if we don't say it's okay for it to swing this way, then we're dishonoring the past of it being this way.
So, okay, let me offer a description of how I see this kind of playing out, the things you're describing, if that's okay. Yeah. I'm okay if you want to continue, if there were more, numbered bullets that you wanted to hit, but I do kind of want to explore that idea a little bit of teasing out the individual from the group.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say that never mind, let's take that part of the conversation about reparations and addressing the past.
Yeah, that's just a subset of the idea of group justice and group injustice.
I understand, and we're setting that aside for a moment in
Yeah.
my talk here. So what if we look at this not as a punitive, like it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game where my ancestors hurt yours, and therefore there needs to necessarily be an exchange of power, economics, whatever. There doesn't need to be an exchange. Let's look at it a little differently. Let's look at it like we're all going to be a team starting in this moment to undo some of these structures that are unfair, so that all of us Americans, and we'll just keep it Americans to simplify,
Yeah.
we Americans, whatever that means to you, can pursue, life, liberty, we're entitled to the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and we have an equal opportunity. How do we make that real? Okay. Now, in order to do that, we are still going to have to acknowledge history, right, and understand the structures and how they came to be. There is no way that we can dismantle that structure if there are barriers to me recognizing my complicity or my involvement in that system as I maintain it and benefit from it in the current second of this day.
You're going to have to, okay, I hear what you're saying. You're going to have to give me a concrete example that we can work with. And I want you to pick I think what would be helpful is what you feel like the most racist current structure is in America that you are complicitly, maybe you and I are complicitly maintaining.
Okay. Well, at risk of complicating things, I think it's very hard to separate race and class in America, because the overlap runs so deep. Because of our history, we tend to be somewhat segregated by class and race together. And so it's hard. So I think in order to understand the worst crimes of racism, we must also understand the classism that exists and the structures that exist. Right? So,
Sure.
Okay, so I'll try to give a concrete example. I don't know if I can draw up the worst racism possible, but
one of the top 10 most racist structures that we're currently maintaining.
Why don't
unconscious.
Why don't I just talk about my own personal experience at the moment with how I'm benefiting from being a white guy at this moment.
Great.
So we just had this whole global pandemic crazy thing happen, right? Mm-hmm. And we're in a situation where the government, who, is put in place by the folks who can, the people that got voted for were people who could raise enough money to be on a stage, to be the only people that the voters got to pick from. Okay? I know this feels out in the weeds, but it's literally impossible to take it out of the convo.
Okay.
So we have those people, and we have them in Congress, and we have them in all the branches of government, are people who are connected to corporate powers that paid for them to be known enough to be voted for, to be put into office.
Yeah.
Okay. So decisions get made, and we have this pandemic. And there is a government recommended and or forced shutdown of businesses across the board, like small businesses. Some businesses are still happening, like Amazon, et cetera, Instacart, whatever. And as we're in it, I have in my mind, I'm out of work, and yet I'm not, because my family does own a farm. And they own stocks. And those things are fine. Those things are protected by the powers that exist.
Mhm.
Okay? I'm kind of bailed out, and the ultra wealthy are bailed out. And the ultra wealthy are wealthy because of an intragenerational transfer of economic power and money. And statistically, it's been proven that people generally do not change the class position that they are in the United States of America. There was a study that said if you divide the economic strata of America into 5 quintiles or something, only 79% of people manage to change quintile during a lifetime, and more often than not, the next generation goes back to the original, and people of color are more likely to drop a quintile. So what I'm saying is, as there's a transfer of money and economic power, there's a transfer of political power. And so, I know this is I'm way off in the weeds, but just ride with me a minute.
I'm with you, man.
Because now I have to talk about how that affects the direct experience of a human being as they're growing up. Everything in our capitalist society lends not only am I gifted, I have the money to fall back on, I will inherit land. I mean, is there anything more metaphorically obvious than I'm going to inherit farmland in America that was, I'm inheriting stuff that was, slaves and migrant workers built our farm many, many, many decades ago, right? So my point is, it's not just that I am the recipient of, but it's also a complete difference in lifestyle and a difference in the skill set I'm afforded. And I wrote down this, because I kind of did want to talk about this, and I didn't know it would come up in this context, but here it is. Because I'm a student, I have all these dang notes. So I grabbed this note card because I really like it. But there was a work written by a guy, and I'll probably pronounce your name wrong, sir, wherever you are, Gregory Mancios. And Gregory or Manchos, I don't know. But he did some work on how different classes, meaning societal classes, the rich, the poor, the working class, he divided that up into some strata, and he examined, and I just realized it's I apologize. I am saying the wrong words. It's Jean Anion that wrote this. Mancios is a different person. Sorry, Jean or Jean Anion. So Anion studied how class affected school, and I wrote this down on a little card. So Anion observed a working class, a middle class, an affluent group, and an executive group. In other words, these are the strata their parents and their neighborhoods are inside of. And in their school, they're actually taught different skill sets. And this doesn't happen by any grand federal doctrine. It just happens by nature of the circumstances of life and the kind of funding and what they have available to them, the safeness of their community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What they found was that the working class is learning how to do mechanical tasks and exhibit physical grit. In other words, you sit in your seat, you stay still and quiet, and you fill out the thing. You put the A where the A goes and the 1 where the 1 goes, and you do your thing, and you turn that in, and you sweat it out, and then you go home. And that is a perfect setup for someone who's always going to work in kind of like a labor and service kind of a situation. The middle class are offered skills for getting things right, coming up with the right answer, and they're able to evaluate directions. So, okay, these are the directions. What do they mean? How do I solve this problem to get the answer? But the answer is key. I need to come up with an answer. An affluent school does more creative activities, and they're rewarded for individual expression. And finally, the executive schools, the very wealthy families, they're the ones who are actually taught to do analytical work, to leverage power. So it would be things like go out in your community and interview a community member about this topic, come back and give a presentation, and they're rewarded for their individuality and their ideas, or they're presented with 2 articles and asked which one they agree with, those kinds of things. They are trained to petition powers, right? So the wealthy are learning to interact with wealth and influence their community and make judgment calls, make decisions, and they have these skills. The working class, they're learning to be quiet, get in line, stop what you're doing, enter the cog to the wheel, blah, 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 and then you get what turns out to be in life their paycheck. Except we just wiped all that out. Those jobs are gone. And so the person's reaching for any cog they can. They're desperate. So if you're, maybe you're a white working class person in this pandemic times, and what are you talking about? You're like, the government is oppressing me. I need to get back to work. Right? Someone in a more affluent situation would see that being forced back into an oppressive system where I'm doing work that I'm not even getting paid a living wage, and I'm trying to raise kids, and there's all these oppressive issues, and I'm paying unfair prices for my health coverage, whatever. I'm going to pick up my dang gun and go and tell them, let me back in the job. Because what I know is I'll do my thing that you say I can't do right now, so I get money so I can feed my kids.
Yeah.
Well, try being Black and marching to the Capitol with your gun demanding to go back to work, right? So people in those communities, the cops are definitely not their friends. That's not their direct experience that they're having. They're in trouble. They're in danger. And the only thing they know is, for 400 years, I've knelt, I've sang, I've marched, I've begged, and we keep getting murdered in the street. For me, what is my life like? I'm sitting here. Now, do I want to be living off of money that I'm borrowing from my stepfather? No, but I can do it. And if I really wanted to, I could sit in this little apartment and just keep getting straight A's in college and ignore the racism issue. And I'm painting all this picture for you because I want to show we can't decouple our experiences from our personal experiences from these structures. I am trained. We are humans, and I am trained to play a game of chess, intellectual chess, problem solving, metaphorically, out there in the world, to research things, to petition my government for change, to leverage powers of communication, to use my computer to have this conversation with you. And not everyone in the world grew up playing chess as they were raised by their parents, as they experienced society, as they were in school. They were taught, someone in a different class, and in our country that now, because of that intergenerational transfer of wealth and lack of class mobility, is largely people of color are pushed into lower classes and held there. And suddenly we expect them to play chess. All their life, we've been giving them checkers. They're not less intelligent. They're not less skilled. People of color are not worse at managing their money. They're not more violent. People of color are not more, they're not more apt to a certain sort of low level crap work. But that's what we reward them, a petty pittance for them to do. And they need to, because they have family. So here, my experience, how is this all affecting me at this moment, is I could sit here and be doing nothing racist, believing nothing racist. But if I'm not encouraged to explore in what way am I benefiting from this racist system, what are the odds that I'm going to, of my own volition, out of the blue, for some reason, feel inspired to get involved and create policy that's better than what Obama and the left are doing? And I'm not a Republican, okay? Not even close. There is no party that's left enough for me. What I'm saying is, as a member of a so-called woke group or whatever, the comfortable thing would be to live in this post-racial narrative and say, well, yes, I know there is some historical badness, but the laws of today say that we're equal. And so, we all get to work really hard. And if somebody doesn't make it, they didn't have the talent, and whatever I have, I earned. And if I'm suffering, all I have to do is the same thing I was taught: play the game of checkers harder, and I'll make it. I'll make it. That's not how the racist system works. So that was like a really long-winded and extemporaneous thing. But I don't know how to talk about it without gluing everything together that is, in fact, our experience.
Yeah, I think that's a really important sentence that you just said, which is that you don't know how to talk about it without ungluing everything together.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about it without gluing everything together.
I know. It's more convenient.
Well, I think it's more effective.
Okay.
It's more effective.
Show me.
Yeah.
Here's why I'm doing. Let me just, and then I'll be quiet.
Yeah.
Here's my worry. When I heard you talking to Will Winters.
Yeah.
William Winters. I heard you talk about victimhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard you kind of wanting to, what I heard at some points was William sounding like he wanted to have a little bit of a more pessimistic view because it would light a little bit more fire for change for him. And I heard you saying, that's really stressful. Why don't we just focus on the positive, or take a more positive view to say, these elements are ours, we have power, we can. And I wanted to shout at both of you, hey man, call the glass half empty, call it half full, but grab the faucet and twist immediately. You know what I mean? Fill up the glass, because people are dying. So why would we want to waste time diminishing the powers of racism? And that I'm saying, not out of logic. I'm talking about my visceral emotional reaction was, why are you diminishing racism as a dangerous power in our lives at a moment where we need to be looking it dead in the eye? So I'm sorry. I know that is also your plan. So help me organize.
Okay. So first thing is, I want you to know that I'm with you, that the post-racial narrative is kind of a spiritual bypass. It's just like a kumbaya, we're already there. Everybody just needs to see that we're already made it,
I love that word. There's spiritual bypass.
Yeah, it is. It's like a moral, spiritual bypass, right? I'm with you that it is so important for us to be like, what systems am I participating in? And that everything that alerts us to the fact that we may be swimming in waters that we don't understand is useful. And this is where the anti-racist view, which I'm going to call view number 3 right now, is like really good at being like, hey, look, you're swimming in invisible waters. You need to look around and know that fish don't understand what water is, but we should understand what water is because the water we're living in is unjust and it's hurting people every day. And so there's something like a wake up, look, you know, it's got this like, and I see you really taking a stand for that of like, hey, this message of we need to look and we need to examine, especially the things that are most comfortable, you know, is a very important message. I see you taking a stand for that in what I'm hearing you say. And anti-racist view has a very strong ethos around that. It has a very strong ethos of like, even if it makes you uncomfortable, look. Even if it's invisible to you, look. Even if it's benefiting you, look. You know, it's like look again, examine, right? And I love that. I love that. That's like a, it's just like a, let's not get complacent here. You know, let's only rest. There's work to be done. We cannot rest. We cannot just go along with the flow, right? The piece that I don't think is effective is when everything gets glued together, Tony. And a lot of things glue everything together. Trauma glues everything together. Guilt glues everything together. A sense of powerlessness glues everything together. A sense of frustration and anger glues everything together. That happens for me all the time. It happened to me when I wrote this article. I glued a bunch of things together that are not supposed to be glued together, you know? And
but isn't it more like they arrive glued together? And the way
I don't think so. I think it's very useful if we're talking about changing a system to understand it and to actually be very explicit about this piece needs to change. This piece needs to be taken down. We need to be specific about changing this to that. I'm an engineer and I was trained as an engineer. And when you can't look at a piece of software and be like, this whole thing needs to be thrown out. We got to rewrite the whole code. I mean, you can. It's a very violent thing to do, and it requires like revolution from the ground up. And if that's what you're proposing, then we can disagree about that. But if we're talking about changing the system, a very complex one, then I think being very specific about what's past and what's present, and what's presently unjust, and fixing it. So, for example, if we say, I just recently learned about this, some huge percentage of court stenographers who actually write down what is happening in the courtroom don't understand Black people more than any other group of people, and regardless of whether the stenographer is Black or white. Right. And so unless you speak American, unless you speak sort of well-educated American, you get mistranslated. Like your court record is transcribed incorrectly, and sometimes to mean the exact opposite of what you actually said. And this happens to Black Americans and Latinos more than anybody else, right? Well, and this is recorded, it's given, it's like a, so to me, that's an example of a very specific institutionally racist problem that we have. If our entire criminal justice system hinges on court proceedings, and the court proceedings are recorded by stenographers, and the stenographers are like institutionally in their job, I would call this institutional racism, in that they actually can't hear what a Black person is saying more often than what a white person is saying. We have a serious damn problem on our hands here. And so that would be something that you and I could actually do something about. We could actually petition for higher standards of testing for stenographers, petition our social justice system to fix that thing that's broken, that's really messed up, right? The other thing that you mentioned that's really messed up is how money gets somebody onto the stage and onto a ballot and reduces our democratic options to these two or three options. Like, so that's something broken about a political system. And so what I love about Bernie's like separating campaign finance reform. Everybody can stand behind that there's corruption in the way our politicians are elected. Right? So if you say, look, campaign finance reforms perpetuate system of injustices because it robs people from their voice, I cannot possibly disagree with you on that. It's not all glued together. It's like a very specific, this is an issue that impacts the vast majority of Americans, reduces our choice, robs us of our representation, and it continues the rigging of a system because money and politics should have nothing to do with each other. And the same way that religion and politics should have nothing to do with each other, we should have an iron curtain between money and politics. That's an example of something I can get behind because it's very specific, right? one of my one of my critiques of the anti-racist movement, not the core principles of the movement, but the way it gets distorted, is that everything gets lumped together, is that class and race get lumped together. Historically, of course, there's a reason why the vast majority of low-income folks are like their low-income folks are disproportionately represented by people of color. That's because of history, for sure. History plays a huge, if not, it's like the major part that it plays in that. And so, and if we're talking about ways to make Americans more mobile, like class mobile, then we should talk about ways to make Americans more class mobile. We should address classism, not racism. So the whole one of my critiques, which I wrote very poorly, was it's not always just racism. It's not, if we say racism, then we don't distinguish between a campaign finance reform problem from a racist stenographer system problem, from a classist problem around how education, like property taxes and education, how education works. So for me, education reform is a class issue, and it's the very real classism that exists in the country. The stenographers is a race issue, because specifically it's people of color who are harmed by that structural inequity, right? And then I think campaign finance reform, for example, is an American issue. Every single American should be pissed about this regardless, right? And so to me, what I'm saying is I don't like, and I think it's harmful for the anti-racist movement to look at everything from the lens of race only, and from the lens of race first. And I think it's confusing the past with the present. I think it's confusing class with race. And I think it actually waters down our cause, and it waters down the very real institutional racism that still exists. Because here's the deal: you can get every American on board with reforming education so that there's more class mobility, right? But if you say this is about race, then you lose all lower income white people, for example, who aren't willing to read Robin DiAngelo's work and get bought into the whole theory. They're like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is hurting me too.
Yeah.
You know, why not include everybody in everybody who really is interested in a fair system to say, let's create more class mobility in America, and then make that a human issue, not a race issue.
But yes, I actually agree with
and
you.
That's the humanist, and that's the fourth view, Tony, that I'm trying to communicate and doing a poor job of, which is a humanistic view of justice. Right.
So let me offer this.
Yeah.
And I feel extraordinarily vulnerable saying this because I'm out on some skinny branches, and these kinds of conversations can feel downright dangerous. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to, it's dangerous in that I don't want to hurt anyone. And it's dangerous where I don't want to paint myself into a corner where I seem like I'm certainly trying to undo these structures. I'm not trying to add anything to it, you know. So as you were talking about the stenographer, what was coming to mind was, it was interesting. It reminded me of, you asked, if you don't mind me bringing this up, you asked a question of the hive mind on social media. You know, how does the anti-racist movement view whiteness, right?
Ask what the definition of whiteness is, how they're using the word whiteness. Yeah.
And what I commented was that as a person who grew up in a thoroughly, I mean, Shereef, I don't know if you know, I mean, I grew up in a thoroughly racist indoctrination as a child.
You grew up in like worldview number one, with the like extra calf muscle for Black people.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
I would go further than that.
Sure. But it's the overtly, like, it's the sort of superior race argument, the superior race worldview.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
The way that the racist learns racism isn't that whiteness has a quality. It has a inherent quality. It's that whiteness has none of the markings of inferiority. whiteness isn't a thing that has qualities. Whiteness is a lack of descriptives that, the way I understand for my family, and I'm not talking, don't worry family, I'm not calling you racists, but I'm saying people of our line who grew up where we grew up and arrived in this nation when we arrived. That's what I'm saying. But so how do I feel like I'm losing my train of thought trying to be safe. But it's kind of like, I had a geology, let me go here. I had a geology professor once, and he told me that when he was in a Land Rover going up some mountain to look at some rock formations in Africa, as a researcher. And he said that he was riding in the Land Rover with a black man, and a dark black man, of skin color. And the guy turned to him and said, you and I are the only white men for miles. Because white is something that gets assigned to folks for a variety of reasons. A fun read is Teddy Roosevelt. I think it's called Becoming American. I can't remember, but he's talking about the Irish, and he's talking about them as immigrants in a way that you wouldn't expect to hear about someone who now we see as a white group. And he's comparing their merits as an immigrant group to the Huguenots and the Dutch. And it's very interesting to read almost racist arguments about a so-called race that we now associate as being white. The reason I'm bringing that up is it's important when we talk about the stenographer, but also, as you explore and talk about your own relationship to race, that we're very, very careful and clear about how we unpack that. I almost feel like, do I remember you saying to William that you were saying, well, I'm not black, right? You were saying I'm Arab. Didn't you say I'm not black, I'm Arab?
No, I said I'm not Arab, I'm Coptic. But where I grew up in Cairo, and in Cairo, if you're Coptic, you're not Arab.
Then I apologize. I misheard you.
But when I landed in the U.S., I became Arab. My identity is you're an Arab man.
Now I understand. I'm sorry. I didn't ask that for any reason other than I thought I heard you say that, and I wanted to ask you because that surprised me, and I didn't understand what you were talking about. Apparently, I heard you incorrectly.
I mean, I also think that I'm not black, but nobody's ever told me that I was.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just how we all have these complex relationships to how we've been defined. And the stenographer, as we were talking about it, I was hearing you say that, they weren't able to understand, Black Americans. But it's kind of, unless you can speak, more proper American. The truth is that the way that Black people are speaking that might be hard to understand is also American. You know what I mean?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I'm using proper American in scare quotes.
Yeah. And that's what makes it so difficult.
Kind of educated.
Because
I'm with you. I mean, I think that's what makes it structurally racist. It's a structurally racist part of our system that continues to today and impacts Black and brown people way more than it impacts white people. It's a problem that we have today. But that's why I'm saying, from the fourth view is I want us to identify these problems and be very precise and clear and
I think
sharpshooters.
So in the spirit of that, I love that. I love being a sharpshooter with our bubble and love.
Yeah.
So in the spirit of that, maybe part of the reason that your piece landed in a way that sounded to me that it wasn't in line with its goal was that like I heard what you said about the Bernie Sanders thing and about campaign finance reform. Obviously you and I share a belief that we need to make our elections more fair for all Americans, and that's going to benefit everyone. But that's that figuring that out and seeing the direct line between that and classism, and getting our hands dirty in that structure is something we can do because we have access to that influence without as
Sure.
many barriers. And so when we talk about what
Yeah.
reparations looks like, it's more like that. But I think that it's easy because of,
So to me, that's not reparations. That's repairing an existing broken system. To me,
no,
that's where,
I agree with
like,
you. I'm saying that's the better thing to focus on than trying to focus on reparations. I think that's what we agree upon.
not only that, I'm saying that the anti-racist view that focuses on group justice actually stands in the way of us focusing on individual justice, which will get us group justice. Like it's like, to me, it's a strategy. It's a strategy thing, and it's not semantics, Tony. It's a very different way of approaching a problem. And I actually do feel like the group justice view is detrimental to at least my view of how we can get through to justice. I think it's actually is an opposition here, you know.
Sorry, you're kind of freezing up a little bit for me.
My article was terrible in that I didn't do a good job differentiating what I was saying from view number 2, which is the post-racial, everybody's a snow. Okay. I was saying that what's ineffective and I think caused more harm than good is that it didn't differentiate the sort of fourth view that I'm trying to advocate for from the second view, which is the, like, we're all in post-racial, racism doesn't exist. Everybody who's suffering is just playing the victim. And you know what I mean? Like that sort of narrative has a deep groove that the anti-racist view rightfully is pissed about. And then I sort of slid into that for some folks.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a thing where, you may identify in a certain place in the intersectionality where it feels like you're coaching peers on how best to engage this system of deconstruction in the race thing. We can't.
Well, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to coach anybody. I'm trying to say this is the world. This is my vision for what I want justice to be. To say that other than the authority of being human and wanting to help anyone, but I am being human in a place like you are to say, hey, this is how I think. This is how I want to go about building a more just world, and things that I'd like you to start thinking those things. You know.
Yeah, I just mean it's hard to say that, don't be a victim when there's a cop standing on your neck. You know what I mean? Like it's hard. There is a certain, there's a desperation that is had for those who are living in communities where there's bullets flying by and the police are their enemy and there's no food available and et cetera, where maybe it's kind of okay to have the experience of bucking against that system pretty hard. And then if you have some leverage politically or some economic ability to petition the powers that be, cool avenue. But knowing that some folks don't have it in the moment of crisis, when people are screaming out for help, maybe the idea of victim, and this is all metaphorical and real, maybe the best thing isn't to call that victimhood, because it's just very.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's worst. I think that's the worst possible framing of the word. I couldn't I couldn't agree with you more. And that's one of the things that I really am I cutting out.
Yeah, you're kind of cutting out it.
I'll repeat that again, and maybe you can edit that part out.
We'll see what it looks like.
Okay. What I agree with you 100% that it's a really terrible way to use the word victim. Don't be a victim. Like that's just like really poor language, and it doesn't inspire what I'm wanting to inspire and what I'm wanting to point to. It does a very poor job of kind of. It feels like victim blaming, and it feels like tone deaf, and it feels like pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Like, you know, it's got a very, it's easily kind of co-opted into the second world view. It's very poor way to communicate it. Yeah, and I'm looking for a better way. And so far, the best it came, part of the conversation with William was this sense of vigilance, of being taught to be vigilant about systems that are coming out to get you, and the fine line between educating our children and each other to actually know the ways in which the system is set up against us and kind of navigate that intelligently so we don't get hurt, and then how that could cross over into seeing the whole world as designed to put you down. Everything in the world is designed to put you down, and creating this empowerment narrative, a narrative that you, by virtue of where you're born and the skin that you're born into, are at a huge disadvantage, and that you don't have the power, and the systematic power is against you. And so I understand that the intention is to train and make sure that no harm comes to us and so forth, but what I am trying to point to is that there's a shadow to that, and when it goes too far, and I do see it going too far, it can be a disempowerment narrative. It can be a narrative of you actually don't have the power.
So I think,
does that make sense? And that's
it definitely
play
makes
the victim.
No, it makes sense, Shereef. I just feel that there are ways. I think that I don't think that there's anything I could say about it, in where the parts of it that I disagree with that you haven't already said. I think it was a tactical error. The timing of the piece.
Well, it's a tactical error, but also my understanding, and also I feel like there's also an empathy in me that's just kind of gotten worn out or closed, that needs to be reopened, where I'm so burnt by that disempowerment narrative, and I've seen it hurt so many people that I care about, that I fail to empathize about where it's coming from and its roots, you know? And so, but I do think that this empowerment narrative is the number one thing that gets in the way of anybody succeeding in this country. And this is really what I want to, one of the pains that I see in the anti-racist narrative, especially if it gets distorted and it becomes more of a caricature of itself, is that it's telling, literally, Ta-Nehisi Coates in his book, he's telling every Black person born, your body is not yours. You know, just so you know, the world you're born into today, 2020 America, your body does not belong to you. And I think there's something really important that he's trying to say, in which that there's still very deep, systematic injustices and violence done to Black bodies that's not done to white bodies, and it's reminiscent of a past that's horrific beyond our imagination, which he does a beautiful job of eloquating. But I also think there's a real harm in telling a little Black boy, your body's not yours. And I understand that, and that's to me like an entire generation raised on reading this material and really looking at the world as in that hostile view. There's nuance here that's very important of how do we acknowledge the very real violence that exists without painting the world as hostile, as primarily hostile. Well, and that's what I want to talk about. And I don't think there's any room for that conversation.
Well, I think the pushback is that, you know, we are in a society with for-profit prison and a ridiculous criminal justice system, fake drug wars, and with Black people being locked up and then working in what is essentially slave labor.
Yes, I agree. That's messed up.
And you and I just, we agree,
And
we agree on what you said. And I'm wondering, how do we inspire pushback against that system, which isn't painted, it's real. No one's painting that the world as oppressive. It is oppressive. So how do we fight that while still being empowered?
Wait, let me slow you down. We agree that parts of the world are oppressive. I don't think the world is oppressive.
Okay.
And so we agree that oppression exists. We agree that it's a dimension of our world. I tried in my article to just flat out giving some examples of how I personally experienced that. So I'm under no delusion that our world does not contain oppression. But to tell a little boy or a little girl, the world is oppressive, is very different. It's oppressive.
What's the message? What's the message that you would want to send to those young boys and girls?
What I would want to teach my own sons, which is that there's injustice in the world for sure, and it's your responsibility to watch out for it in the ways in which it could hurt you, and be aware of those. And I will train them as best as I can to tell them what the ways are that it will hurt them. It's your responsibility to counter this injustice in many ways that you can. And it is absolutely your birthright to see the world as way more than that. It's absolutely your birthright to see the world as beautiful, aligned, generally for your well-being. And I understand that the anti-racist worldview would call this a privileged upper class, whatever thing. But maybe I was lucky enough to get that from my upbringing, but I want everyone to have that. And I don't think it only belongs to upper class or middle upper class folks. I think that view of the world being, that view of the world being benevolent is critical to somebody growing up and feeling empowered in their world, versus the view that the world is oppressive. What you just said is, to me, the distortion of the anti-racist view. And I see it everywhere, right? Yes. If you are Black, you have a higher chance of a police officer killing you or harassing you than if you're white. And you need to know that, and white people need to know that. They need to know that to know that. And that needs to change. But that's different than seeing every single police officer as your enemy. That's bullshit.
Oh, okay. And you told William that your children, you said they are white.
They are.
And
yeah, I mean,
and what that
society
means, what that means in our racist society is that they are passing, quote, so-called passing, right? Because there are those terrible racist people. They do the whole one drop of brown or Black blood and they're not white. You know, that crazy.
Sure.
We're going back to that number one you described, right? That's a real place. That's a real mind that's out there. And if would you give them the same message if you weren't sitting somewhere comfortable, if you were out of work with no money and rent coming in, sitting in a little cramped apartment, and there were sirens outside and blood from last night's riot, and they were going to have to walk out, and they were not white, and you had to expect them to walk face to face, come in face to face with those armed policemen.
No, I would give them a different training about how to navigate their world. They would get a different training, but I would want them to get the same message about the benevolence of the world. And so, if it's a Black boy in West Oakland, he needs different training in order to stay safe than a white girl in suburbia. She needs different training in order to be safe, right? And she needs it, and there's some things that she's unsafe with. So she's going to get a different training from her parents about safety. Well, safety training is not the same thing as painting the world as dangerous.
And how not to hurt other people.
And that's sure, yeah, absolutely. And we're on the same page about this. But I mean, maybe you can help me by trying to articulate the point I'm making, which is the difference between safety training and saying the whole world is arrayed against you. That's a very important difference. And an anti-racist movement is not making that distinction. As far as I can tell, I don't see anybody making that distinction. And people who try to make that distinction get trashed. And I think that's the distinction that Obama was trying to make. I have a lot of criticisms of Obama, but his speech about taking responsibility wasn't a speech that's ignorant of racism, wasn't a speech that's ignorant of oppression or ignorant of the way that the playing field is rigged. His speech was about, and also, you are empowered.
Yeah, I think you asked me what I would say.
It said both and. It's a movement towards justice. And empowerment has that. Yeah. What point do you think I'm making? Let me articulate it better, because I'm doing a lousy job of doing it clearly.
I think I might understand you okay. And the way I would rather hear it worded is, there are a lot of, instead of saying your body doesn't belong to you, say that in the world we're living in, there are many people who think that your body belongs to them. There's a lot of those people.
Yeah.
And I want you to know that those people think that because they're hurting and they're broken inside and they don't know any better. And it's up to us to be strong and teach them. But we also must not tolerate that at all. And I don't know
Thank
how.
you. And your body does belong to you. And your body does belong to you.
Your body does belong to you. And I think, I don't know how to talk to little kids the way that I would. I've never had to, I'm not a dad. And I never had I've never seen.
But we both worked together in a job talking to little kids.
Right. In my experience, kids knew me more by what I did than what I said. So I tried to live up to it and show them that they mattered, you know. So it's a different conversation.
Sure, I agree.
But I would
But I
say
think that there's also a narrative, Tony. There's a story. We're human beings. The best way to get somebody's attention is to say, let me tell you a story. You have them wrapped. They're entire sections of our brain just organized to hear stories and identify with them. And the story that we tell is really important. And to me, the anti-racist story that's being told is a story of an evil country and an evil society and an evil race.
I think,
and that's to me,
I understand.
To me, that's not the story that I want to raise my children in. That's not to say I don't want to ignore the past. That's not to say I don't want everybody responsible for their power. And that's not to say I don't want to acknowledge different hands that people are dealt and what they can do with these hands. But I don't want to tell a story that the world is evil, that America is evil, that society is evil, that white people are evil at heart. And that's the story that the anti-racist movement is telling. It's underneath it is a story of good and evil. And the intentions are pure. Some of my closest friends are like anti-racist. But I prefer the humanistic view of social justice, the MLK Gandhian view.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious response is they killed him. They killed MLK, and it was riots that brought about.
So let's not continue his murder. Let's not kill his ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
And by the way,
can he come over?
You know when they killed him? And by the way, they killed him when he started actually talking about poverty in general, not as a race problem. When he started actually pointing to the biggest injustice, that's when he died. He started being against the war and he started being against poverty as in general, saying this is no longer a race issue, it's now a poor people issue. And he got shot.
Yeah, how many white people did they shoot for that?
How is that relevant? I'm saying these ideas are important. I'm saying these ideas have no room today in today's dialogue, Tony. I'm saying as poorly as I tried to communicate these ideas, I was called the house Negro, by my friends. Like, there's something really kind of totalitarian going on.
I mean, we
need to be able to disagree about how to go about justice and have a nuanced conversation about it.
I hear you. I think that,
but to me, what I'm seeing is this narrative is more and more like hey, if you don't disagree with this, you're against us. You're either with.
I mean, you're kind of cutting out again. I'm sorry, but I would say that I think that a lot of people get taught what racism is not by a narrative of anti-racism, but they experience racism firsthand. And so it's more a matter of, I know this is real and you know it, and we're going to have that shared belief together. This is very structural, very evil, and very dangerous. I don't even believe in evil, but we can just use the word and say that we're going to have to get very creative to survive it and make it different. Because yes, people are inherently good. They are. Some people don't think you are good. And it'll be very easy to think they're not good when they treat you not good. And it's happening. So we have to survive it, and we have to get creative about how we talk about it, and we're going to have to be stronger than it seems like is possible for a human being. But I think I have a lot of space for anger, for someone to be
I think we need to
insulting
be
and yelling.
I think discriminatory.
Did I lose you, Shereef?
I have a lot of space for anger too. I think righteous anger is an important part of our life. But I just switched to a different Wi-Fi network. Is this better?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
You said you have a lot of space for anger. I'm sorry, that's what
I think anger is beautiful. Righteous anger is the human organism protecting something that it loves. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I do think that it's important to be very disciplined about what stories we're telling ourselves that are making us angry, and to be precise about the stories. And the gluing everything together, I think doesn't create the kind of change that you and I want to see.
If you were going to write a new work and talk about how you and I are in unity, and we're not going to glue things together, but we are going to create, we're going to leverage all the powers we have to create change, because we know that there is, in fact, that we are not in a post-racial America, and that we need to fight it with all we have, but with love, etc. Do you have any idea what that piece would look like?
I mean, I've been working on it furiously, because I promised friends that I would clean up the ignorance and anger that kind of seeped out of, and closed-heartedness that seeped out of my first article. But yeah, I do. I feel like at the heart of it would be, first of all, enumerating these worldviews like I told you about, and saying, this is 1, this is 2, we're here in 3 and 4, we're here in the like racism exists camp. Let's all agree about that. And kind of giving resources to people who are in 1 and 2 to go somewhere else and read something else, and then the conversation I want to have is about this us really taking a stand for, are we going to be a stand for group justice or individual justice? Are we going to define race as the past, or are we going to move towards a world where race is no longer an issue? Like, what's our vision of how we go forward? And these are very contradicting. These are very kind of, you can't have both. You can't have group justice and individual justice. You can't have equal outcome and equal process. You have to choose which one you're fighting for. And then I would say
opportunity,
Well, but that's very different than equal outcome, right?
That's
and so there's a lot.
I'm saying equal outcome and equal opportunity are 2 very different things.
Yeah, and so and I think people are generally tend to feel a sense of justice around one and not the other.
Yeah, I agree.
And they don't necessarily know how to articulate that. And so I want to sort of spell it out and say, these are two senses of justice that we have. And I want to implore people to go towards the sense of justice, which is on an individual basis, to work towards justice, which is about equal process, not equal outcome, and to abandon group justice and to abandon equal outcome justice. And that's difficult because the wave right now is to look at justice as a group injury and a group and a sort of a collective problem. I mean, it's a collective problem. It's all of our problem, but it doesn't get solved on the collective. Because anytime you do reparations for a group, you're going to hurt individuals that had nothing to do with it. And the pendulum keeps swinging.
I feel like for the most part, we very much agree on what you are saying. And I think that I think that you had such a strong reaction to your piece. You've already covered it, but some of the framing and certainly the timing, it was a hot time to drop it. And
I dropped it before I knew any of this was going on.
Well, you didn't know. I'm not saying you chose your timing. I'm saying that's what happened for you.
Yeah.
And I think that if I may make a suggestion, I would avoid anything in the piece that might give someone the idea that you believe that this is a post-racial country. I don't think it's fair to say we need to abandon it. I like the idea of cultivating a productive relationship to race in America. I like that idea a lot. I don't like the idea of minimizing the impact of race, because that's an individual thing for everyone based on all their intersectionalities and individual histories.
Well, let's not minimize it and let's not exaggerate it. Let's be accurate about it.
Yeah, let's learn how to dissect and talk about it. And Shereef, this first step might be to have a reaction. And you can say it's exaggerating, but the truth is we don't know what an individual's experience is.
Yeah, but we're not talking about restoring individual experiences. We're talking about restoring social justice.
I hear you, but what I'm saying is individuals are going to read that paper. And individuals, you want them to be able to receive it. So I wouldn't do anything in it that minimizes someone's experience. Even if it's not your intention, it can come off that way.
Well, so this is a problem, right? Because if and this happens with trauma, and it happens with extreme narcissism, and it happens with hurt, is my hurt and my trauma are so real, and they're connected to my story about what happened. And if you challenge the story, it sounds like you're challenging the experience. And I'm not going to accommodate the trauma by not saying what I think to be true. And I also don't want to be callous towards the trauma. And this is what makes the conversation very difficult, is how can you be empathic and connected to people's real pain without buying into a story that may not be real? And so we need to have the courage to say, or at least the fortitude as a movement, to look to each other and say, let's question the stories, without some people throwing a tantrum and say, you cannot question my experience. Because there's a difference between my experience and the story I tell myself about it.
Can you achieve the same process, but yes, be okay with someone, if that's their reaction, having a tantrum? Because I think it's okay as a first step to say, let's challenge the story. If my response, let's call it my reaction, is immediately, no, this happened, I got hurt. Maybe give some space and expect that that's actually part of the process.
I expect that will happen. I mean, there's no doubt that challenging a narrative will cause people who have taken that narrative to be who they are feel like they are personally being attacked. That's how it works. It's like, hey, I am my story. You're questioning the story. Now you're questioning me and telling me all my pain is for nothing and all my experiences are bullshit. You're now my enemy. And you're now perpetuating oppression and all that. And so that will happen. And I don't see a way around it. I really don't see a way around it. But I don't I'm not, I have a confusion in me, Tony, around how responsible I am to people's trauma. Like I'm responsible to the trauma my children have, the trauma my wife has, the trauma I have, my close friends, but to the whole nation's trauma, like how I don't have a narrative for how that gets healed, you know? Like it's too much. It's like, to speak in a way that doesn't trigger other people's trauma, you would have to not say anything. Our conversation right here would trigger many people's trauma. You would have to not publish this video.
Yeah, that's why it's terrifying. That's why I'm terrified talking about it.
Yeah, but so there's something that's shifting in me of like, I need to be in integrity and speak my truth and make sure that it's coming from love. And that article mainly was coming from that, but there were distortions in it, which is why I'm like, okay, this needs to get taken down. But if something is triggering, if you're not going to say anything that's going to trigger anybody's trauma, I don't think you can even write a love song that won't do that. I don't think you can even write a song without words that would do that. Like, it's just, there's millions of people. There's so much trauma in our bodies. And I don't think we can think freely and go to new places without triggering people's trauma. Now, how to be responsible to that, I have no idea. You write something, somebody's out there in another room, in another city reading it, and they get re-stimulated.
Maybe you answered yourself earlier. Maybe there's a story, a personal story. And you said that's how we communicate. So maybe you, every chance you get, you tell the truth about yourself and say, well, I'm writing this question and it's scary. And I'm saying that I'm trying to be productive about dismantling the processes that hold people back. And I'm saying that we have to be more optimistic than we are, but I'm also saying I don't know how. I'm not ready to deny someone's experience or deny that this is real. I'm saying I don't know how to do this, but we're gonna have to get more productive together, and I have some ideas. What do you think?
I think that's really helpful, but I am getting ready to deny people's stories. That's what I'm saying is I'm no longer willing to accommodate the anti-racist narrative. And that's like, I will take a stand for that. I will take a stand for myself.
Okay, you might not share that terminology because I intend fully to be anti-racist. To me, that's like, I'm not for racism. And I'm not for racism. I need to kill it in me.
That's like saying that's like saying the Freedom and Liberty Act is for freedom and liberty. I mean, it's just a name, it's just a label. I'm saying that I have to give a good name for this narrative that's respectful. And I think the anti-racist narrative is the best one that I have. Calling it the ideology is not, was kind of dismissive. That was part of the problem with art. If you have a better name for it, then
let me think. So let's be real about it. What is it? Because you are anti-racist okay, but that's only because you have ascribed your intention onto the phrase. Others have not. Others are just not for racism. So, I'm not for it. I'm not.
I mean, yeah, you can call it critical race theory.
Yeah, but they took that. They already have that.
They already have that, and I think it's at the core of the anti-racists.
Yeah, but I don't know, man. Critical race theory is legit. If you're talking about the one that sociologists study, that is a pretty. It sounds in line with everything you've talked about.
I think it is legit, but it's legit. It's legit in the paradigm of group justice and group injustice. It sits squarely in that paradigm.
Well, it may be referenced by groups that you disagree with their process, but it certainly doesn't diminish what critical race theory is.
No, I'm saying, like, reading critical race theory, it's a theory based in group justice and group injustice. It's a theory based in defining race as what happened in the past.
Okay. So why don't you come up with something that's like, you're a present day racism interventionalist or some crazy thing. You know, come up with something that's positive. If you want to stay positive, you know, don't tell people that they shouldn't be anti-racist. It's just bad marketing, Shereef. It's terrible.
I know, I'm a really bad marketer.
Oh God, I think that's where you turn to the hive mind. Look how much you got from social media. You posted your article and then you got all that feedback. Maybe get the feedback, then write the article. Say, hey, y'all, I think that we can overcome this racism thing that we all want to beat by doing some things in the present moment that are divorced from history. Let's acknowledge our history.
I don't think it's about, hey, we want to overcome this racism thing that we all want to beat. I think it's, hey, I think we can all get to this justice thing that we all want.
There we go. Hey,
but
man.
That's different than, because I disagree that racism is the biggest impediment to justice today. And I think that view is narrow in that sense. I think there's a lot bigger problems than racism in today's America, like classism being the primary one that I see. And so I think it's like, no, don't be anti-racist, be pro-justice is what I want to say, you know?
I think you should hire a marketer. You need a public relations expert.
I just want to be able to, I just want to be able to say what's true for me and discover it in real time in conversation. Like this, after this conversation, I'm clear about what I think. I want to be able to have this dialogue, and I want to take a stand against forces that make this dialogue dangerous, or make this dialogue illegal, or make this dialogue like one of us is going to get canceled, you know, or called names, or have their community withdraw from them.
Well, when you have a group of people whose history has more or less been stolen, wiped clean from the old chalkboard of history, I don't think it's a positive thing to tell them to let it go, because that's the oppression they're fighting, is that history gets erased, the erasure of Black lives. What's that?
Is that what you're hearing me say?
No, I'm saying that, well, here's the thing about me. I understand what you're saying, but I'm also able to hear your words from a different perspective and say, the way that will likely land on folks is not going to do what you think it's going to do.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I'm saying, as witnessed by your article.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I can't disagree with you there.
So I'm encouraging you to abandon the narrative of we need to let go of the trauma in our past, because it's the same.
No, I'm not saying we need to let go of it. I mean, I think we need to heal it. I just think we need to be disciplined in when we're projecting it on the present.
Great. See, that's better already.
Thanks. 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 Yeah, and I also think we shouldn't try and talk in ways that don't ever trigger anybody's trauma, because then we'll have to talk very narrowly about things.
Well, you don't have to be fearful of triggering people, but I think you should be very mindful of what people hear.
I agree. Maybe I'll run the draft by you.
Because I would be glad to look at it, but I'm the white guy, so there's that.
Oh, Tony. Okay, we'll have to do another video about just that sentence, because I really want to talk to you about it. But I did promise my kid I'll play with him, so I'm late to that.
All right. And if you wanted to do another video, I'd be glad.
Why don't I send you the draft, and then we can do a video about that. We can discuss it.
Let me give you a phrase that's been coming up in a lot of my interviews, and I'll just leave it with you.
Okay.
And it comes up in music. One of my favorite composers, Mark Ribot, he says that at all times, whatever sounds we're using in modern composition, we're playing a duet with history, and we can't escape it. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's not we have to play the same song that we've been playing for decades, but let's play a duet with history and see if we can come up with a better harmony on it.
I love that.
I hope you and your kids have fun. And I have to send this out to the public and just say, I'm no expert, man. I'm just talking about me over here. And if there's anything that I've said that's upsetting, I do care that I've triggered you. I still believe what I believe. And I just hope that some good will come from this conversation for folks.
Well, I know it's definitely been good for me. Thank you for being willing to listen and engage it. I feel a lot clearer about things. And I love you, and it's good to see you.
You too. And just so you know, man, there's nothing you could say, do, or write that would ever diminish my opinion of you, because I know who you are. You know, that's it.
Thank you, brother.
All right, Shereef.
All right,
Much
man.
love. I'll stop recording.
Okay, brother.